East Wing of the White House is gone. It looks like a scene out of 9/11. This was actually yesterday. Today, it's literally gone. Yesterday was 9/11. Today, just gone. Trump lied. Trump said he wasn't going to touch the White House, his new construction for his grand ballroom, that, by the way, is now costing $300 million, right? Our military isn't even going to get paid because of the shutdown. Our farmers are suffering because of Trump's tariffs. He's not going to give them money either. But he found $300 million for a ballroom. He also found $40 billion for his friends in Argentina. He also found $230 million for himself. Did you hear that one? Trump is demanding U.S. Treasury give him $230 million from your pocket and my pocket. U.S. tax money he wants to compensate him for all the investigations. Yeah, you were investigated because you're a crook, buddy. Maybe we should be compensated for the investigation. Why the hell did we have to spend money investigating you? Maybe you shouldn't have committed as many crimes as you did. White House claims, we're the most transparent administration in history what he did with this. No, he didn't. He just released the donors today because he refused before. And by the way, still didn't say how much money they're giving. Oh, and he claims he's giving money too, but he won't say how much. Yeah, he's not giving a dime. A top Trump advisor says Trump is going to run for president in 2028 for an unprecedented third term, an illegal third term, a term that is banned by the U.S. Constitution, which would make him an illegitimate president. It would make it a coup d'etat, and it would make America run by a dictatorship. Steve Bannon said this in the context of Trump has been chosen by God to run America, and God wants him to run for a third term. Folks, this stuff is so freaking dangerous. I want to play you a little clip of Bannon.
Well, he's going to get a third term. So Trump 28. Trump is going to be president 28. And people just ought to get accommodated with that.
So what about the 22nd Amendment?
There's many different alternatives. At the appropriate time, we'll lay out what the plan is. But there's a plan, and President Trump will be the president in 28. Trump is a vehicle. I know this will drive you guys crazy, but he's a vehicle of divine providence.
Remember when Trump said you never have to vote again? This is January 6th all over again, folks. He tried once to overthrow the government, to illegally remain in power. He got away with it. Why wouldn't he try again? Very scary stuff.
So Donald Trump just said he's going to, and I quote, go into Venezuela and kill them. Let's listen to this.
I don't think we're going to necessarily ask for a declaration of war. I think we're just going to kill people that are bringing drugs into our country. Okay? We're going to kill them. You know, they're going to be like dead. Okay.
And when a reporter asked if he'd seek declaration of war, just like you heard, right? You know, that thing that Constitution requires. You heard what he said. He said, I don't think we're going to necessarily ask for that. We're just going to kill them. You just heard that. Just, let that sink in for a minute. A U.S. president openly saying he'll carry out extrajudicial killings in a foreign country. No congressional approval. No debate. Just unilateral violence, And justification? Drugs. But let's be real. We've seen this play before. Drugs, democracy, security. These are just the masks empire wears when it wants something. Just like I said, I made a huge video on this on YouTube. And this case, what it wants is Venezuelans' oil. This isn't about national safety. It's about control of territory, of specific territory, of narrative, of resources. And the psychology of it is classic authoritarianism. Dehumanize, call them criminals or traffickers or whatever, desensitize, make it the idea of killing sound like a practical solution, and normalize, get applause for brutality. That's how democracies rot from the inside, Not overnight, but one outrageous statement at a time until no one's shocked anymore. It was never about drugs. It's about power and who's allowed to use it without any kind of consequences.
Hey, things are going to get really bad starting November 1st. And that is because Donald Trump's government has decided that starting November 1st, they are cutting off SNAP benefits for an estimated 40 million Americans. SNAP benefits are a government assistance program designed to provide food security for Americans who otherwise are not able to afford that food themselves. Before anyone tries to be a smartass in the comments, these aren't handouts. You have to go through rigorous and constant checks and rechecks to qualify for SNAP benefits. You can't buy alcohol or cigarettes with SNAP benefits. You can't buy electronics or entertainment with SNAP benefits. The only thing you can buy with it is food and covered medicines. And even then, the vast majority of the 40 million Americans who rely on SNAP benefits to survive work a full 9-to-5 job. The only reason they're on those SNAP benefits is that the cost of living has skyrocketed because we have spent the last 10 years deregulating businesses and allowing them to raise the prices on everything. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican, if you're on SNAP benefits, they're getting cut off for you on the 1st of November. The only reason that these SNAP benefits are getting cut off is because Republicans intentionally caused a shutdown, and even though they are the only ones with the power to end that shutdown, they are refusing to do it. This is Maga stealing the food out of your mouth, out of your family's mouths, out of your children's mouths. This is Maga stealing your ability to buy Thanksgiving dinner. This is Maga stealing your ability to have food by Christmas. Look, if you're on SNAP benefits, I need you to not panic, but prepare for the eventuality that you are going to lose access to that food assistance. Start figuring out where your local food pantries are, where your local soup kitchens are. Start networking with your friends, your family, and your neighbors to figure out how you're going to keep food on the table. For anyone who isn't on SNAP benefits, this is the opportunity to start building a mutual aid network. Start organizing in your community how you are going to address food insecurity in the coming months. Start building up a supply of shelf-stable food. Canned, dried, it doesn't matter. Figure out how you're going to distribute it. Figure out how you're going to reach out for people who need it and don't know how to find you. This winter is already going to be harsh enough without Republicans taking food out of the mouths of 40 million Americans. And it is up to us to make sure people get through it.
If you haven't figured it out by now, we are in the find out stage. The closer we get to November, and the closer real consequences start hitting people, the more you are going to see what people mean when they say voting has consequences. Now, many people are not going to care, or they're going to pretend like they don't care while everything around them falls apart. But I'll say this to you, if you've been stocking up on popcorn, it's time to bust that out. Because there's a real argument brewing right now between the rich people that voted for this man and the poor people that voted for this man. And maybe they're not all rich, but they're definitely being very smug about the fact that these benefits are going away. And they're making their jokes. It's more than just the toast lady. It's a lot of them making their jokes and really, really talking down to people. You know, I saw one guy say he was so excited to see the welfare queens get exposed. And if you don't know, that is very much a code for black women. But the other side is a bunch of people. I done seen multiple people be like, hey, I voted for this guy and I haven't been bothered by anything else, but this food thing is pretty bad. And y'all may want to judge me, blah, blah, blah. You know how they get. Y'all may want to judge me, but I don't like the fact that kids aren't going to eat. Because it's most likely your kids that aren't going to eat. It's going to be people in your communities who aren't going to eat. And this is what everybody was trying to tell you, but you brushed it off, saying we were being woke, radical, wasting money, social, whatever you wanted to say to dismiss what people who weren't voting like you were trying to warn you was coming. And y'all even adopted the FAFO saying because you didn't think it meant anything. You didn't think we were really being serious about how evil these people were going to be to their own voters. But here we are. It's find out time. I really hope you're ready.
I know it's late, but President Trump posted late tonight that he is cutting off all trade negotiations with Canada because of their quote-unquote egregious behavior. What could be so egregious, you say? Well, it's this advertisement.
When someone says, let's impose tariffs on foreign imports, it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing by protecting American products and jobs. And sometimes for a short while it works. but only for a short time. But over the long run, such trade barriers hurt every American worker and consumer. High tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and the triggering of fierce trade wars. Then the worst happens. Markets shrink and collapse, businesses and industries shut down, and millions of people lose their jobs.
So that's just part of the ad. The basic gist is they are using the voice of former President Ronald Reagan, who was notoriously a free trader and not a real big fan of tariffs. And they are using Reagan's speech from 1987 to sort of push back against President Trump's tariff policy, which, you know, the Canadians and the United States have been fighting over recently. Well, in a Truth Social post tonight, President Trump said that that ad that the Canadians put out was fake. In fact, he reposted a statement from the Ronald Reagan Foundation, which also said that the Canadians took President Reagan's speech out of context, and they didn't ask the library's permission to use Reagan's voice in this multi-million-dollar, multinational television ad. So, is it fake? Did Reagan actually say that? Well, I found the actual speech from April of 1987, and I'm going to just play you the full context of what former President Reagan said about tariffs back then. You get to be the judge.
Now, that message of free trade is one I conveyed to Canada's leaders a few weeks ago, and it was warmly received there. Indeed, throughout the world, there's a growing realization that the way to prosperity for all nations is rejecting protectionist legislation and promoting fair and free competition. Now, there are sound historical reasons for this. For those of us who lived through the Great Depression, the memory of the suffering it caused is deep and searing. And today, many economic analysts and historians argue that high tariff legislation passed back in that period, called the Smoot-Hawley Tariff, greatly deepened the Depression and prevented economic recovery. You see, at first, when someone says, let's impose tariffs on foreign imports, it looks like they're doing the patriotic thing by protecting American products and jobs. And sometimes for a short while it works, but only for a short time. What eventually occurs is, first, homegrown industries start relying on government protection in the form of high tariffs. They stop competing and stop making the innovative management and technological changes they need to succeed in world markets. And then, while all this is going on, something even worse occurs. High tariffs inevitably lead to retaliation by foreign countries and the triggering of fierce trade wars. The result is more and more tariffs, higher and higher trade barriers, and less competition. So soon, because of the prices made artificially high by tariffs that subsidize inefficiency and poor management, people stop buying. Then the worst happens. Markets shrink and collapse, businesses and industries shut down, and millions of people lose their jobs. The memory of all this occurring back in the 30s made me determined when I came to Washington to spare the American people the protectionist legislation that destroys prosperity. Now, it hasn't always been easy. There are those in the Congress, just as there were back in the 30s, who want to go for the quick political advantage, who risk America's prosperity for the sake of a short-term appeal to some special interest group, who forget that more than 5 million American jobs are directly tied to the foreign export business, and additional millions are tied to imports.
Okay, so Donald Trump has claimed that he has defeated inflation, even though 75% of Americans say that costs are soaring. Here's how his ridiculous claim is connected to his one big ugly bill, which is connected to the current shutdown and healthcare fight. Even though most Americans are struggling with higher costs, Trump says we've defeated inflation. It's similar to George W. Bush saying mission accomplished in 2003 about Iraq. It wasn't mission accomplished. The United States spent another 8 years in that war. Back to present day. Trump saying that inflation is gone will seem out of touch for some, and for others it'll seem like he's distracting from the fact that he's actually causing it. In fact, this is why their one big legislative accomplishment, the one big ugly bill, is so unpopular. Utility bills are going up, and they cut billions of dollars in new energy projects. Healthcare costs are going up and about to skyrocket. They cut over $1 trillion in healthcare. So not only are they not defeating inflation, Trump and congressional Republicans have created higher costs. And one of the most urgent cost issues is healthcare. This is why we're fighting so hard to extend the Affordable Care Act subsidies. They could have extended those subsidies in the one big ugly bill, but they didn't. So unless they do it now, 24 million Americans will see their healthcare costs skyrocket. In my district, that's 32,000 Ohioans. Millions of those Americans will lose their healthcare altogether. By the way, to add insult to injury, instead of working with us to reopen the government and extend these healthcare subsidies, Trump gave $40 billion to bail out his friend in Argentina. Fact is, everything's going to come back to costs. Inflation is the #1 issue for most Americans, which is why they should work with us on one vote to reopen the government and extend these healthcare subsidies, which 78% of Americans support.
I watched Trump's announcement at the White House today, so you don't have to, and here's my overview, and this one was wild. Here's the craziest thing he said. It's a direct quote when he's talking about the drug cartels. I don't think we're going to necessarily ask for a declaration of war. I think we're just going to kill people that are bringing drugs into our country. You know, we're going to kill them. They're going to be, like, dead. Let's get into the meat of it. He spoke for about 70 minutes and mentioned Biden 14 separate times and Obama 3 different times. That puts his MBBs, or minutes between Bidens, at less than 5. We're going to have to power through this because a lot was said in 70 minutes, and if I make a part 2 for this, then history shows that you're not going to watch it. So he says 120,000 criminals have been arrested since he took office. He also said that Biden let the cartels take over our country and that they have caused more terrorism in our country than any other group that exists. He also says that Biden surrendered our entire country to the cartels. I don't remember that happening personally. He says we started losing wars after World War II when we became woke. He also says that there are beautiful black women all over the city of Chicago who are wearing Maga hats because they want Space Force to come in, of all things. He also says that he was going to surge San Francisco. He doesn't explain what he means by surging the city, but apparently a bunch of business leaders asked him not to do it, and so he just decided that he's not going to do it. And then finally he says that Portland is burning to the ground actively and it's full of insurrectionists. Next up, Pam Bondi spoke, and she said that no administration in the history of the United States has ever worked as well together as his administration, and that every single person in his administration is working 24/7 on the issues, even though they all refuse to negotiate on anything about the government shutdown. I wrote this in my notes, so she must have seemed really angry, but I wrote, why is she so mad? Like, she's in power. She is the attorney general, but she is very upset. She says that the project that they're working on, I guess the point of this whole meeting was to talk about criminals that they've gotten out, even though that's barely what they talk about the entire time. But she says that the project is the brainchild of Stephen Miller. So you know it's going to be some bigoted white nationalist BS. She also says that 3,200 gangs have been taken off the street. Not gang members, but gangs have been taken off the street. And finally, she's comparing the amount of drugs that they've seized to different objects because she can't just use sizes and have it make sense. And she says that all of the drugs that they've seized would fill up 4 separate semi-trucks, but also separately, all of the cocaine, just the powdered cocaine, would fill 1.5 swimming pools. She says a big swimming pool, like in your backyard. She doesn't say like an Olympic-sized pool or anything like that. She's saying if you have a big swimming pool in your backyard, imagine it filled 1.5 times with cocaine, and that's how much cocaine powder they've taken off the streets. Next up is Kristi Noem. The only thing of interest she said is that since 2000, there have been 1 million people who have died of drug overdoses. Donald Trump later in the speech is going to say it's 300,000 every single year. She again has to say that so that when she goes on trial later, she can say, look, I wasn't being dishonest. It was him who was lying. Then the drunk comes up and he says literally nothing of import. I wrote in my notes, literally nothing of import. Then Tulsi Gabbard comes up and she says that they apparently arrested some cartel boss who was targeting pregnant women and then taking them and selling their organs and then selling their babies. No proof of that or anything. Next up is Nosferatu himself, Stephen Miller, and he says that no president has ever gone after the cartels in any way, shape, or form before, and also this country would be dead if Trump had not been elected. Next up is Trump, but just for a minute. He said, and you're never going to believe this, that we were a dead country a year ago and now we're the hottest country in the world. He also says that fixing potholes in DC is part of law and order. I don't know because he doesn't really explain anything about that. And then he says that the people in San Francisco, because he's not surging anymore, that he's going to let fix the issues in San Francisco. He says they're the biggest people in the world. He doesn't expand on that. Next up is Cash. He says that 200 million people would have died had they not seized the fentanyl that they seized. So I guess 2/3 of our entire population would have just drug overdosed had they not been out blowing up boats in the middle of the ocean or shit like that. He also the whole time kept I don't know if you've ever done drugs before, but there are certain ones that'll make you do that a lot. And then he says the media should go out and talk to the lives that have been saved. And I wrote in my notes, I have no idea what the fuck that could possibly mean. How are they going to go out and talk to the lives that have been saved? Who? The 200 million people that aren't doing fentanyl now, I guess? Sorry about the cursing there. I try not to curse in these recap videos because I want it to be appealing to a wider audience. But again, I have no idea what the fuck that could possibly mean to say, go out and talk to the lives that have been saved. And finally, we have Todd Blanche, who says that it's disgusting that people don't want cops going out with masks on and no identification and kidnapping people in the middle of the streets. Now, he doesn't word it that way, but I would call that American to not want those things. He calls it disgusting. Next section I titled Trump Takes Questions. He says for 5 months now, it's 5 months now, no one has entered the country illegally, which he says, of course, he doesn't believe, probably because it's a statistical impossibility. He also says that China is smuggling fentanyl now, not going through the Mexican border because they don't want to have to deal with that. But because of the fentanyl they're smuggling, he's now charging them additional tariffs. So they're making $100 billion a year by smuggling fentanyl into the United States, but they're paying in tariffs, which again is completely not true because a tariff is a tax on you. It's a tax on an imported good paid by the importer that is passed down to the American consumer. That is you who is paying the tariff. They're paying $120 billion in tariffs, so that now it's a bad business decision for them to smuggle fentanyl in and make $100 billion off of that when they have to pay $120 billion in tariffs because they're smuggling in fentanyl, which again is not true or how tariffs work at all. The next thing he says before we get into anyone else talking, he says he's never seen 5 engines on a boat before, so if there are 5 engines on a boat, it has to be smuggling drugs. I've seen plenty of boats, small boats with 4 engines on them, so I have no idea what he's talking about. He's just probably never been on a boat. He also says it's hard to find any floating vessel in either the Gulf of America or the Pacific. And he does talk about the Gulf of America because it goes on a long tirade about how that's the actual name. He also says that because of his naming of it, the Gulf of America, and the AP's refusal to watch that, they were barred from covering him at all. I watched the entire speech on the AP News' feed. He also says that they are sea drugs again today. He used to call them water drugs. Yesterday he called them ocean drugs, sea drugs, and drugs by sea. Today he called them sea drugs twice. And he also said he thinks, keyword there, he thinks the number of people who were killed due to overdoses last year was 300,000, which I did mention earlier in this recap. Then the drunk comes up and they ask him, hey, why don't you just arrest these people on the boats instead of, just blowing them to smithereens? And he says, because that's what we did in Afghanistan, of course. I have 3.5 minutes left, and the amount of notes that I have left on what Trump says alone is enough to cover a 10-minute video, so we're going to really have to go through this. He asked a female reporter where she's from. She has an accent. She was from France. I've mentioned that a bunch of times. He does it every single time a female reporter with an accent asks him a question. Some reporter says, hey, they were doing a vote on the West Bank in the Knesset just yesterday. Are you worried about that at all and how it has to do anything with your peace agreement? And he says, don't worry about the West Bank. Israel isn't going to do anything with the West Bank. He says that only after he explained multiple times that he couldn't understand what she was saying, even though it was very clear, and asked multiple other people in his cabinet to please answer the question because he couldn't understand what was being spoken in pretty clear English. He says Zohran's a communist, of course. He says that 11,843 murderers entered the country under Joe Biden's open borders and that more than half of them had committed multiple murders. Just last week, that number was 11,888. Welcome to the show where points don't matter and everything's made up. Caitlin Collins from CNN asked him a question, and he says, quote, you know nothing about nothing. You're fake news. He says that Democrats are being paid money to fight against Republicans when the only thing that Republicans are trying to do is stop crime. And then he says that the No Kings protest was full of paid agitators. I was there for free, just saying. He says that they found hundreds of thousands of children who were lost under Biden, which again is of course not true. And then he says that they would bring most of them home, but they're mostly either dead or slaves. He dropped his favorite trifecta when he says that Dems want open borders, men and women's sports, and transgender for everyone. This one almost got the craziest thing he said because I live in the state of Colorado, but he says that gangs took over multiple towns in Colorado and the weak, ineffective governor there just did nothing. I live here. No gangs took over any cities, I promise. He's asked if they should ban the apps that track ICE agents, and he says, I'm not really an app guy, so Pam can answer that. And then Pam's like, yeah, we totally want to. And then he says that ICE agents should wear masks because it's unsafe for them to not wear masks. He says the No Kings protest was embarrassing, that there weren't really any crowds out there. And then he says that the signs they all had were made professionally. So good job, anyone who made a good sign that Donald Trump thought was made professionally. He also said that the protests are a good thing and that he goes out and protests, which He doesn't. And then he says that we're going to be very surprised when we find out who was paying for the signs, because apparently they already know and they have all the information on who was paying for the signs. No, I didn't change my shirt back. It wasn't worth the effort to finish this video. He says he's very glad that Russia is saying that they're not going to be affected by any of the U.S. sanctions. And he also says that Democrats are only good at two things. That's cheating in elections and playing very dirty. Here's a direct quote. Adam Schiff is one of the lowest forms of scum I have ever dealt with in politics. He also says that Adam Schiff is a very sick person. He says he gave up his salary, which he didn't. He says he puts all of his money and additional money into the White House, and now it's gleaning, which it's not. It's lying in rubble on the ground. And he also says that he's taking care of inflation, and thank God for tariffs, because without tariffs, we'd be a third world country. He says he knows who came up with the word cartel, but he's just not going to tell us. He also says that Mexico is run by the cartels, but he very much respects the president. He says Jasmine Crockett is a very low IQ individual, and that, of course, we have $20 trillion in investment that's going to come in the U.S. by the end of the year. He says Trump derangement syndrome will go down as an official diagnosis because doctors will make more money by treating it like a mental disease. And then he says that they've raised $350 million for the new ballroom, but it's only going to cost $300 million. It was $250 million last week. And finally, he says some random donor who he doesn't want to name gave $130 million in order to fund the military. That's $100 per service member, just so you know.